before you put any enamel on it, besides cleaning it, one thing I do is take some 280 grit wet dry sandpaper, and you're going to want to rough it up a little bit, give it some scratches. If you do that to the whole thing, it just gives the enamel a place to kind of stick to, and it helps it to not pop off later after it's cooled. So I would rough it up a little bit. Then of course you'll want to clean it with baking soda because you don't want to have that debris on there. Now we can add the enamel and it will stick a little bit better. Before you enamel anything, your metal that you're working with, and it can be either nickel or copper, needs to be totally cleaned. So I've cleaned this with baking soda. I would put it in the pickle pot, pickle it, rinse it with water, then take the baking soda paste and clean it, because if there's any debris or oils or let's say fire scale on there, that will make it dirty and the enamel will not want to stick. So these I've all cleaned ahead of time. If we look in here at the enamel, this is just a color, and it is called turquoise. It's transparent, which means that you will be able to see the color of the clay through it. So it's important to kind of read what color it is, because this one's transparent. And then I have a different color over here, which is a red. And this one, I believe, these are all opaque, which means it's completely going to cover the metal, and you won't be able to see the metal through it, and you also won't be able to see the designs through it. So if you simply want to use just one color, first think about if it's going to be jewelry and you need a hole in it, you got to put the hole in there before. So I just drilled a hole. If you try to drill a hole through the enamel, it will crack because it's glass. So always drill the hole before, do any texturing before, any stamping. This is a trivet. So after you put the enamel on there, you don't want to be handling it. So always put it on the trivet to do the work. That way you don't have to pick it up with your hands because it's very delicate and fragile. I've got lots of these little sifters. There's some small, medium, large ones. You have to put the enamel through the sifter to kind of shake it on. And then when you're working, always put some paper underneath because this stuff is expensive. So after I'm done shaking it on, any extra that I have, I'm going to put back in the container. Okay, let me show you just simply how it works. If I just want to use one color, I'll take it and just sift it on there. So you see I'm just using my finger and just tapping it on there. And I want to put enough of a layer, and yes, there is a draft. I can feel it. That it's going to be a good thick layer of glass. So one color, that's simply how it's done. Take the extra, put it back in here. You can see that I've got a nice layer on there. If I'm ready to fire, this goes on here because that's actually what I lift and put into the enameling kiln. And then now that I've got my one color that I've used with this paper, now I can just take it and make a little funnel and put any extra back. Okay. Otherwise, you're going to go through a lot of enamel, and like I said, it's expensive. So you can take a very sharp pencil, a mechanical pencil, or just a little tool, and let's say you want to draw some things into it. You could certainly do that, okay? And so then obviously the metal is exposed and you've got some little lines in there. So that's the Sgrafitto technique. And you could do red on the bottom. And see how I'm doing just red kind of halfway up. And if you remember that turquoise one that I showed you, I did leave some copper exposed. So you could do that if you wanted to. So I've got orange on the top. You also don't want to be breathing this stuff, so if you're downwind and you see that the dust is coming, maybe move directions. All right, so that one's good. It is difficult to see, but if you guys can see what I've got going there, it's because the colors look very similar right now, but on the top I've got an orange, on the bottom I've got red, so they're just going to blend together. I'll pour it out so you can see it. Okay. And so it is going to stay a little bit chunky, so it'll just look like chunks of yellow. So if you wanted to take a few of those and add them in, you could. It's going to stay chunky. It's just larger versions of this, right? So that's an option. This is glass as well. So if you want to just take a couple of these, you could, kind of sprinkle them, or if you want to take the tiny tweezers and maybe kind of like make some shapes, you could. So that's glass. All right, let's look at the glue. This is glue that is specially for enameling and cloisonne works. Let's say I want the rest of this copper because it's hammered copper. You can see that I've got a hammered texture in there. And I just want maybe like a few stripes of color. To get the enamel just in one certain spot, you can take this glue and just kind of paint on a design.
You don't want too much of it. Alright, that's plenty. Wash that off with water. Now.
This is the transparent turquoise. Get a good layer. It's obviously sticking to the glue. And it's going to stay on the glue. Put the extra back. Then, hopefully what you can do is just shake the rest off. Okay? Then I can get some specific designs and some specific shapes. And make a little triangle shape. You could do it with the glue, but if you wanted a really, really like specific shape, you could just use a stencil. Sprinkle it through the stencil, and then very carefully lift it up. We good there? Okay. All right, so you can see that the temperature of the kiln right now is 1,872 degrees. 1,800 degrees is actually a little bit too hot for enamel. But what I do is I actually just watch through this little window. You can see when it starts to turn from a solid into a liquid because it'll get glossy, it'll melt down and get smooth, and then that's when I take it out. So I'm going to let this cool down a little bit before I put it in there. All right, all right, I try to have a steady hand. There we go. Woo. Okay. Ooh, yeah, we're getting there. Okay, so if you look in here now, it is glossy, so I think I'm going to take it out. Then you do not want these things cooling too quickly because it can go through thermal shock and that can kind of repel and snap off of it. So I always let it cool on top of the kiln. There's heat coming out of that little hole, and then slowly we'll kind of move it further away from the heat, and then eventually we'll move it over here. It turned black, okay? But it didn't, it's just because it's so very hot right now.